everyone, it's Lucky with Unfiltered Lucky. And today I want to talk about Brent Kopaka. Now, when I first heard his name, I began researching him right away because the Idaho 4 crimes had just happened the month prior. So, Moscow, Idaho at the time was being described as this very safe and sleepy small college town. We were kind of being led to believe that crime didn't really happen there. Now, Pullman, Washington, where Brent K's life was taken, was right next door. It was less than 10 miles away. And it was also described in a very similar way to Moscow, Idaho. So when I heard the news about Brent K, I automatically thought, well, that's two major incidents in these two small neighboring towns. So I began researching Brent K because I felt like there could possibly be some sort of connection. What happened to Brent K is a story in itself because there's a lot of unanswered questions about what exactly happened that day between him and law enforcement. So automatically I was thinking, these are two very serious events that happened in two very small, sleepy towns that were reportedly very safe. These towns are less than 10 miles apart, and these events happened within 30 days of each other. So, in my opinion and in my thoughts, I was thinking it's very possible that maybe these two events might be connected in some way. So immediately I began looking for that connection. I began looking for a connection between Brent K and the King Roadhouse, or, the victims of the Idaho 4 crimes, and even maybe between him and Bryan Kohberger. But up until now, I can say that, in my opinion, I still have yet to see any evidence that Brent K was connected to any of these people. So I know that Bryan Kohberger and Brent Kopaka lived less than 2 miles away from each other in Pullman, Washington. And allegedly, they both lived in Pennsylvania at the same time. But really think about these distances. I mean, they lived less than 2 miles away. But think about that. Most people don't know who lives 2 blocks away from them in their own neighborhood. I don't. So it wouldn't mean that just because Brent Kopaka and Bryan Kohberger lived so close together in Pullman, Washington, that they knew each other at all. Now, it's very possible that they did know each other, and maybe they did. But so far, I have not seen any solid evidence that, that we can see with our own eyes that Brent K and Bryan Kohberger knew each other. A lot of people believe that Brent K was involved or has some type of involvement in the Idaho 4 crimes. And it's very possible that the people who believe this may be right. Maybe he did. But I just haven't seen anything with my own eyes that would say that Brent Kopaka was definitely involved in these crimes or even knew these victims. So I know that this probably isn't going to be a very popular opinion, but I just do not see any connection between Brent K and the Idaho 4 crimes. I just don't see anything concrete, any evidence that, that was the case. Brent K was 36 years old when he lost his life. So he was basically 16 years older than the victims of the Idaho 4 crimes. I highly doubt that Brent K was running around in the same circles with the frat boys at the University of Idaho or the sorority girls. I highly doubt that he was partying on frat row. Now, he may have been self-medicating with alcohol or narcotics, or maybe both. But I don't see him partying with a bunch of college kids. He was a 36-year-old Army combat veteran who had suffered a traumatic brain injury and was also battling PTSD. So I just don't feel like he was hanging out with a bunch of college students. I don't feel like he had any connection to these individuals. Now, a traumatic brain injury can be a lot of things, and there's a lot of levels, to that injury. A lot of military suffer from traumatic brain injuries. It can range from a concussion, all the way up to more serious injuries. PTSD is the same thing. Different people deal with their PTSD in different ways because there's different levels. Now, it doesn't mean that because Brent K had PTSD that he was a violent individual. Now, I know that the call came in to law enforcement in Pullman, Washington, because allegedly he was threatening to take his roommates out. And that sounds violent. That's never a very good thing. And according to his best friend, who said in an interview that it's very possible that he could have been very intoxicated when this happened. Now, that doesn't excuse anything, but it's a possible explanation. I'm going to tell you what I think happened, in my opinion. But before I do that, I want to talk about something a little more personal. And it's a more personal experience that I believe relates to this story. This isn't really something that I would normally talk about, but I do believe that it has a very strong relation to what happened to Brent K. So, I lost my best friend 5 years ago on May 16th. It'll have been 5 years, May 16th. And I'm at peace with that. I'm able to talk about that. And I think that it's important to talk about because I believe that it's important to put this type of information out there because PTSD is a real thing that not only military, personnel deal with, but people all over the world deal with PTSD every day. Just like Brent Kopaka, my best friend was also an Army combat veteran. Now, he had been in Iraq, he had been in Afghanistan, and he saw a lot of things. And it really affected him emotionally. Now, people would have never known this because you wouldn't have known from his outward appearance. If you met him, he was the life of the party. He was fun. He laughed. Everybody enjoyed being around him. But inside, he was battling this depression that came from PTSD that was caused from, the things that he had seen in combat. He wasn't noticeably different because he had PTSD. He was just like everyone else. He was just like you and I. And nobody would have ever really known. He was not a violent person. He was not aggressive. He was very laid back. He liked to have fun. So, him and I had talked a lot about his depression because, unfortunately, he's not the only friend that I have that is battling and was battling PTSD. So it's always been important for me to keep in touch with these friends because you just never know where their heads are at. Because that's kind of how PTSD works. You know, somebody could be really struggling with depression from PTSD. And most people would never know that because it's not always easy to spot. You know, people who have PTSD, especially people who tend to be very proud and, you know, don't want other people to know, tend to hide it very well. So as I was researching Brent K, I began realizing that him and my friend were almost identical. They were 1 year apart. Brent K was 36 years old. My friend would have been 35 years old. They were both Army combat veterans who had seen a lot, and they were both struggling with PTSD. They lived their lives in very similar ways and even had kind of the same appearance, according to family and friends of Brent K. And, you know, their descriptions of him. They were very, very similar. And I think a lot of that had to do with their lifestyle. You know, they were both in the military and both kind of had these issues in common. So I began relating to Brent K quite a bit because I could see a lot of my friend in him. Now, when I started seeing photos of Brent K, it was shocking. The similarities were shocking to me because I know there's been a lot of talk about, you know, the photo of Brent K in his military uniform and the more recent photo of Brent K where he has a beard, his hair's a little bit longer, and, you know, he doesn't look like the same person in his military photo. But that's common. You know, you got to remember, Brent K had been out of the military for 13 years when he lost his life. So a lot had changed. He had been into combat, and that'll change anyone. That'll even change your appearance. So when I started seeing these comparisons, everything just looked the same between Brent K and my friend. My friend was exactly the same way. I'm not going to post any photos of him, but my friend was the exact same way. Very clean cut, wearing his military uniform. And when he got out, you know, my buddy battled PTSD for 10 years. If you look at the photos between when he went into the military and 10 years later when he lost his life, it would be identical to the situation with Brent K. Of course, Brent K is not going to look the same as he did 13 years earlier. Not to mention, he had been through a lot during that 13 years. So, of course, his appearance is going to change. His facial expressions are going to change. And it's not uncommon for individuals who were in the military to maybe grow a beard and change their appearance when they get out. Because when they get out, they can look however they want. They don't have those same, you know, strict guidelines that they had when they were in the military. On the day that my friend ended his own life, it was a normal day, just like any other day. I was actually moving into a new house, and he was helping me move. So I was getting rid of a bunch of stuff, and he wanted it. So he was going home to pick up a trailer from his apartment. And 4 hours later, I got the call that he had ended his own life. And I told law enforcement when they called me that they had the wrong person. I had just seen him 4 hours ago. He was in a good mood. Everything was normal. So I didn't want to believe it. And I actually argued with law enforcement, and I was telling them, you have the wrong person. And they basically, let me know, because I was texting him while I was on the phone with law enforcement. And they basically let me know that they could see that I was texting him. And that's when I knew. So basically what I'm saying is that it happened that fast. I never saw it coming. Never. It happened that quickly. And sometimes there's something that can trigger someone with PTSD. And sometimes that's when they lose their fight. So Brent Kopaka, in my opinion, was maybe the same way. Maybe the day when he lost his life was the day when he just felt like he couldn't fight anymore. And it happens that fast. I wouldn't be telling this story. I'm not telling this story for sympathy or anything like that. Because as I said, I'm at peace with it. It's something that I can definitely talk about now. But the comparisons between my friend and Brent K are shocking. They lived their lives very much the same way. But they also died very much the same way. When I was researching the incident that occurred with Brent K and Pullman, Washington SWAT team, I felt, and I still feel this way, that he never had any intentions of leaving that apartment. I don't believe that he ever had any intentions of leaving that room. Because in my opinion, I believe that he felt defeated at that point. I don't believe that it was because, he had information about the Idaho 4 case or that, he was involved in the Idaho 4 case. I think it's a lot more simple than that. I feel like he lost his fight. And right there was when it was going to happen. I think that it's very possible that Brent Kopaka used law enforcement to end his own life. Brent Kopaka's family described him as someone who sounds exactly like my friend. Someone who was loved by his friends and family and had a life. They also said that he lost his battle with PTSD. So just like my friend, Brent Kopaka's lead up to this event was pretty much the same. And the ending was also the same. Now, they didn't do it in the same manner, but it was the same result. And in my opinion, I feel as though maybe Brent Kopaka was just tired of living. kind of the same as my friend. It's very possible that Brent K could have been intoxicated or under the influence of substances. And maybe that played a part in his decision. Maybe, that's why he appeared to be very irrational when the Pullman, Washington SWAT team took his life. But maybe that was his plan. And I'm not saying that that's what it was. But I feel like that was Brent Kopaka's plan. Because as I said, I just feel like he was done fighting. And I feel that way because I have experience and I'm around, men and women who battle PTSD all the time. It's not uncommon. People all over the world, military, non-military, people all over the world battle PTSD. Maybe not to that extent, but it's not uncommon. I feel like Brent Kopaka could have used law enforcement to end his suffering. It's just a feeling that I get. Now, Brent K had PTSD. He had a traumatic brain injury. But would that make him capable, or would that make him even interested in taking the lives of 4 University of Idaho college students? I just don't feel like there's any connection. I don't feel like there's any connection at all between the incident with Brent Kopaka and the Idaho 4 crimes. Now, is it possible? Of course. As I said, there's a lot of people who believe that Brent K had something to do with these Idaho 4 crimes. And maybe they're right. But I just do not feel like there's any solid evidence that he even knew these individuals. I don't believe that there's any solid evidence that he knew Brian Koberger. There's a lot of people out there who suffer from PTSD. And that doesn't mean that they're going to go out and take people's lives. There's violent individuals in all walks of life who don't have PTSD. They're just violent individuals. So just because somebody has a traumatic brain injury or is battling PTSD does not mean that they would commit this type of crime. I don't even think that the Brent Kopaka incident would have gotten the exposure that it has if it weren't for the Idaho 4 crimes. They happened in very close proximity, within 30 days of each other. So I can understand, because as I said, in the beginning, I was looking for a connection because it seemed odd that 2 small college towns who were described as being very safe had these 2 major occurrences. So I was looking for the connection just like everyone else. But I just never found that. It's not uncommon for people to lose their lives, due to the involvement of law enforcement. A lot of those stories we never hear. And I really don't think that we would have heard about the Brent Kopaka story if it hadn't have been for the Idaho 4 crimes. I just don't feel like the 2 are connected in any way. And could I be wrong? Of course. Maybe Brent Kopaka did know 1 or more of these victims. Maybe he was familiar with the King Roadhouse. but I haven't seen any solid evidence. You know, something that I can see, something that I can touch. I just haven't seen it. I could be wrong, but it's just a feeling that I get when it comes to Brent Kopaka. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I really do appreciate it. And if you liked my video, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Stay tuned for my next video, and we'll see you next time.